I just noticed that as we started to read through that. And thank you, Mark Licht and Mike Henderson for joining us this morning. So this is a continuation of the sort of a series of these calls where we want to make some of the expertise available to answer questions and certainly attempt to help get information out to folks that are dealing with some very, very uncertain times, trying to make plans about what to do next, about how to attack a harvest plan, and how to also be thinking about 2021 and be ready to go and prepared to put another crop in the ground and hopefully be able to manage what's out there in a way this fall so that we can be in good shape for 21. And so again, thank you to our experts for joining us today. Again, it continues to be a challenging situation across the state, both with recovering from and dealing with the effects of the derecho and the wind path, the storm path of now a few weeks ago, and also continued drought. And we've seen now historic levels of drought in the state of Iowa, D3 drought in west central Iowa, but upwards of 96% of the state of Iowa is now in a drought classification D0 to D3. And we haven't seen that level of drought since September of 2013. So make no mistake, this is a situation that is impacting the crop and impacting folks all across the state. And unfortunately, many, many folks who are dealing with all of the above situation where we have drought impact with wind and in fact some hail on top of that. So folks are continuing to deal with those issues. Had a chance yesterday, in fact, have continued to travel the state to once again be in Benson County, Poweshiek County, Iowa County, and again observe some of the damage and starting to see some fields that have been declared a total loss, and farmers are out dealing with those fields then. And I know that a lot of folks are working with insurance adjusters and coming to decisions about what that will look like, those claims will look like, and then also again what to do, either in the form of a harvest plan or otherwise. So today we wanted to, again, last week we talked about grain quality with Dr. Herberg, and that continues to be something that people need to be thinking about. There are great resources available with Iowa State University Extension. Today we wanted to highlight some of the agronomic issues and specifically talk about cover crops and how they can factor into the plan for the fall, especially in particularly in cases where folks will be looking at some aggressive tillage to provide some cover and protect that land and also retain some nutrients. So cover crops, as you know, it's one of our main focus areas of the nutrient reduction strategy. Again, remember that we've got a whole host of a suite of practices that we would like to see implemented across the state in operations where they make sense. Cover crops are an annual practice. They have to be done every year. And weather, of course, is a dominant factor in whether or not those crops can make sense and how well they perform. But that's why we have management practices like tillage, no-till, conservation tillage, cover crops, nutrient management, coupled with edge of field practices, bioreactors, saturated buffers, wetlands, and the like. In fact, tomorrow we'll get a chance to do a couple of things. Secretary Sonny Perdue will be in the state. We're happy that he's coming out. We're going to get to observe some of the damage, but we're also going to highlight conservation with the Secretary and take him to a wetland project and be able to showcase some of the great work that's happening across the state. We're very, very proud of all the partnerships that go into making these things happen. We're seeing a tremendous increase in the number of cover crop acres in the state of Iowa. Well over 1 million acres today, headed for 2 very quickly. And that's because of a lot of partnerships and work and awareness and education that's gone on. And a lot of folks that have simply said, I'm going to try something, I'm going to learn, and I'm going to adjust and expand onto more and more acres. I'm really excited to see that green in the fall and green early in the spring. And that's a good thing because we know that's having the kind of impact that we want to have. So with that opening, I'm going to turn it over to Mark. And Mark, take it away from here.
Yeah, thanks, Mike. Yeah, I agree that we've got a lot of challenges ahead of us, especially as we look at drought and we look at the damage from the severe winds that we had. And when we think about cover crops, I know that there has maybe been, or at least I've received a little bit of pushback on saying, how do we do this fall, considering the challenges we're up against? And I do think it is a distinct possibility that, yes, things are going to be a little bit more difficult. We're going to have to change how we maybe have done it in the past. But using cover crops is still a great option. It's still a viable option, and we can still get many of those benefits from using cover crops. So, you know, as I've been thinking about this and how do we kind of move forward, I generally have to say that we have to acknowledge the drought side of this first, largely because we do have dry conditions pretty much statewide right now. And so when we think about it from the drought perspective, we need to make sure that we're pairing our seeding time and our seeding method up with the conditions that we have. And so, you know, normally right now, you know, a week ago through the next week or week and a half, we would normally be saying, yeah, let's get out there and let's do broadcast seeding, let's do aerial seeding. But quite honestly, it has been dry, although we did get a nice little shower or two that went across the state yesterday. But because it's been so dry, it's going to be hard to get good seed to soil contact and enough moisture to get germination and emergence to occur, especially once it's down inside the corn and the soybean canopy. So right now, I guess the story here is, because of the dry conditions, let's try to time that aerial seeding or that broadcast seeding with some rain events that can help us along there. That also may mean that, you know, from an aerial and broadcast seeding perspective, we may want to think about a slightly higher seeding rate, just again to ensure that we get enough plants growing out there, right? And then we may also want to be thinking about some of the larger seeded species, just because they will typically do a little bit better when we get into some of these drier conditions. And I'm thinking specifically the winter rye or cereal rye, because while, yes, we can get some good growth with it yet this fall, especially if it gets up and going, we can get some really good benefits out of it come the spring. So from a drought perspective, that's kind of the thought process. Or I guess maybe the other thing that we could mention is typically as we get into September, because of the cooler weather and because of generally more reliable rainfall starts to come, we could also think about postponing that seeding and doing it right after soybean harvest or right after corn harvest, using a grain drill, or doing a broadcast seeding and something like a vertical tillage tool across it to get some soil contact with that seed. So that is still an option. With those, again, I would generally say that we probably want to move to something like if we're on the earlier side of things, something like oats. If we tend to get pushed back a little bit, if we do really have a slow harvest, then, you know, again, thinking of a winter cereal rye is going to be our best option there. Now I'm going to move slightly into kind of thinking about how do we deal with the wind damaged crops. And generally speaking, I think of cover crops, you know, kind of as I'll call it a business as usual in the crops that are still going to be machine harvested, to have a combine run through that field. If we don't have combines running through the fields, especially in the cornfields that are flatter, I'll call it a denser mat, closer to the ground, aerial and broadcast seeding is going to be a little bit tough, just because getting the seed to the ground is going to be a little bit more challenging, but then also just a lot less light penetration to get that seed to germinate and emerge. And so in those situations, where we can and where there's, you know, I'll say it, low resource concerns, we may want to run across those fields with a vertical tillage or a disc, something like that, just to size and break up that residue a little bit, allow us to get that seed down into the ground with a, even with a broadcast or an aerial application, that can work fairly well. But then that also allows for a grain drill to move through quite a bit more easily, at least on the earlier end of this. But generally speaking, if it was just root lodged and if it's at greater than a 45-degree angle, an aerial or broadcast seed will get down into the ground, and as those leaves dry up, we should still have a pretty good light penetration through the canopy to be able to get emergence to occur there. And the other thing I would mention, and I've been mentioning to farmers that have talked to me, is that this is just not a one-size-fits-all year. We're going to have to have flexibility. We're going to have to look and see what's going to work best in our situation, in our cropping systems that we have. So that's, I guess maybe that's where I'll pause here. I don't know if we want to have questions now or if we want to have Mike Henderson talk through a little bit about some of the programs that are available to help support this.
Mark, why don't we let Mike talk first, and then we'll open for questions at the end. And thank you. I think you nailed it with this is not a one size fits all kind of year, and I think this is a time for active management, a lot of scouting, and having a lot of conversations with getting different opinions on what to do. So thank you for that overview. And now as we shift, I'll introduce Mike Henderson. And wanted to just highlight some of the opportunities or the conservation programs that are out there. As I always say, as we get into this part of the conversation, we don't want people to get too tied up on the acronyms or the different sources of funding. What we really want to do is just highlight the variety of opportunities and have folks really become aware of those and make use of them, and contact the conservation office and talk to somebody. And whether it's a state program, a federal program, a local program, there's somebody there that can direct traffic and help connect the dots. But to that end, at the state level, we do have cost share that's available for cover crops, for strip till, no-till, and nitrification inhibitors. I want to also highlight that we have our crop insurance cover crop program that will once again be offered this year. And this is where we offer a $5 per acre premium reduction for an acre planted to cover crops. We've had 3 very successful years of that program. Last year, nearly 200,000 acres enrolled, and we're looking to expand that. So a sign up for that will start occurring in October. For everything else that at the state level, from a traditional cost share standpoint, get in now, pick up the phone and call, because there are dollars available. But time is of the essence. Now's the time to be doing this. The other thing I wanted to highlight is there is some assistance through the state for rebuilding windbreaks. I know this is probably something that's more targeted at spring, but again, it's never too early to be starting those conversations. There are dollars available for trees, and I want folks to remember that as well. With that, I'm going to introduce USDA NRCS agronomist Mike Henderson to talk about things from the USDA perspective. Mike?
Okay, I appreciate the opportunity to visit with everybody on this. And some really good points have been brought up on the funding opportunities. A lot of times you'll come into a USDA service center and talking to that field staff, you may not know if you're talking to a state employee, a district employee, or a federal employee. And that's really by function of our USDA service centers, that they're seamless. We also try to do that with our funding opportunities to provide that one-stop place to really get the information. Really want to highlight within the NRCS side of the funding, it is a continuous sign-up. So anytime you want to or interested in something, cost share or financial assistance, talk to our field office, get in and sign application. Right now with the COVID protocol, it'd be great if you could call into the office, make an appointment, because some of our offices are still on a basically a locked door status and appointment only with that. And a good place to go for information is farmers.gov. You can get a lot of information on the programs that are coming up, as well as do some of the electronic business on there, even signing up for the programs. So with that, kind of the in a nutshell of the background of it, we have in our CS requested additional funds for the Derecho area and the affected crops. Secretary Perdue will be making an announcement later this week on those funds, but really we're trying to target those for cover crops, as well as some of the damage that was done to some of the livestock systems and high tunnel systems across that area that we've put in with NRCS funding to repair those conservation practices, those systems, get it back in place, and make sure that we have the environmental benefits. Do appreciate Mark's comment on it's not a one size fits all. Every field is a little bit different. Driving down the road, they may look very similar, but you get out in those fields and they're very, very different. Same way with the windbreaks and some of the tree damage. Like Secretary Nag said, spring is really the time to put those trees in, but now is the time to start cleaning those up, getting the site prepped so it's ready for spring. So going into the field office, talking to those folks, they'll be able to come out, help you with that conservation plan, help you with management strategies to be successful on that. So that's kind of the programs. We've got a lot of funds available, both through the normal channels, through the statewide, as well as this concentrated area as we move forward with that. One of the things that I'd like to just kind of bring up on that management of the corn out there with the cover crops. Mark brings some really good points up. We need to really think about the basics when we go out there with those cover crops. Can you get that seed to the soil? Is there going to be moisture for that seed to germinate? And is there going to be light for that seedling once it does germinate and start growing? And as long as you concentrate on those basics and look at those field situations, how can we ensure that cover crop placement for success, we can move forward with that in a positive manner. So I don't know, want to move forward with anything else, or if you want me to cover anything else?
Keely, why don't I turn it back to you and let's open things up for questions. Mike, thank you. And Keely, take it away.
Mike Henderson, I saw PJ Huffstetter had a question. PJ, do you want to go ahead and ask Mike what you sent in the message chat?
Sure. Yeah, I'm so sorry. My video lagged actually on my end when you were talking about what Secretary Perdue is expected to say with regards to something, and I just want could you repeat that part?
We're expecting a announcement from Secretary Perdue in regards to our request from Iowa for additional funds through the EQIP program.
Okay, and that's essentially for the in response to, is that in response to the drought or the Derecho or both?
To the Derecho, the wind affected counties.
Okay, great, thanks.
Now I'll open it up to questions from the media.
It's PJ again. If nobody's going to ask, I'll ask a follow-up. Can you talk a little bit or do a little bit of a follow-up on the amount of acreage at this point so far of storm impacted fields that are being just tilled under? Do you guys have any quantitative data on that?
Yeah, very good question, and unfortunately, we don't have a hard and fast number that would tell us how many acres have been released to be destroyed. That process is really working out right now. You've got crop insurance adjusters that are making their way across the damaged area. I've talked with a lot of farmers that have already had 1 or 2 visits from the adjuster. Some are still waiting. And in cases, we've talked about this in the past, that in some cases, this is by design. This isn't necessarily a shortage of folks. Sometimes that crop develops temperatures and dry conditions, and so you're really seeing some of that dieback show up in the field. And so this is really right now, this is happening all across the state. So too soon to be able to give you a hard and fast number on how many fields have been declared a total loss and are being released for destruction, but that will come into picture clearer as we go here through the next the coming weeks.
Okay, thank you.
Someone also sent in the chat that it can be difficult to keep up with the various state and federal conservation programs that exist. Is there any sort of consolidated information source where people can go to get information about these programs?
Yeah, really good point. And it is kind of hard to put all this together. I would honestly, I think from an expertise standpoint on whether it's grain quality or some of the agronomic issues, both the row crop and some of our horticulture and fruit crops as well, that there's just a wealth of information at Iowa State Extension. We have a clearinghouse sort of page at our website, iowaagriculture.gov, that really has, again, some information compiled there. The best place to have a conservation conversation is going to be to contact your local USDA Service Center. Again, as Mike mentioned, by design, you've got district staff, you've got state staff, and you've got federal staff all working together. Our desire is to make sure that that's a seamless experience for you, that regardless of whether you end up talking with a state or federal or local employee, that somebody can help you get to where you need to go. So I think that's still going to be the best place to access all of the different programs. However, I think it might make some sense for us even to just put a sort of a one-pager together that would outline some of these relevant programs that can help folks start to sort it out.
Hey, Mike, thank you for promoting the various resources that are out there and aggregating not only what we've been aggregating here at the university, but elsewhere. I do want to point out, I've been trying to put some of those links in the chat box. If you wanted to find some of those, I did put one up with some information on tillage for unharvestable acres and some considerations there. And then Mike Henderson and I wrote an article about cover crop options for this crop damaged area. So you can find those in those links there too. So thanks, Mike.
Very good.
Do we have any additional questions?
It's PJ again with Reuters. Just a quick follow-up on the zeroing out of fields. Has there been any discussion going forward about any steps that farmers are being advised to take to be able to deal with volunteer corn in bean fields next year? I know that, given the drought, that might actually be somewhat helpful, I guess, in some cases. But I mean, we're not talking about just a few acres. This could be a pretty decent amount of issue coming into the bean crop next year.
That's BJ, really good question. Mark's, we're going to turn it, well, either one of you, but Mark, I'll go to you first. But I think that's a really important point that our farmers are thinking about and need to be thinking about. This isn't just about going to the field for harvest for 2020. The things that they're doing right now have an impact on 21. So Mark, maybe talk about the volunteer corn piece, but you may also mention what's going on from a nutrient standpoint too, in terms of a crop that's standing there today destroyed, and what does that mean for 21?
Yeah, two very, very good points. So where we have this corn that's laying flat, and especially if it's being zeroed out, we are highly, highly, highly recommending that these acres move to soybeans next year, largely just because the ability to control volunteer corn in a corn crop next year is going to be very hard. With a soybean crop, at least we have the ability to use some different chemistries. And again, we're just encouraging farmers to think through that herbicide program, think through what corn traits they had and what soybean traits they're going to have. We have a great opportunity here to think about, what that herbicide program is going to look like, how we're going to manage that between now and next spring. We have a lot of opportunities for conversations. I just try to put this in perspective. If we were looking at a 200 bushel corn crop, we could be looking at upwards of 20 million corn kernels per acre out there. Okay. Now, I don't think that it's all going to be viable next spring, but even if 1% of that is viable, now we're all of a sudden still looking at, 200,000 kernels per acre, right? So that is a tremendous amount of seed that's out there that we're going to have to pay attention to. So, we've been talking a lot about trying to get residue decompose, try to get the corn kernels to germinate and emerge this spring or degrade over the winter. But even if, even if only 1% is out there, we're still going to have a tremendous, pressure to deal with. Cover crops can help us from a suppression side of things, at least early in the spring. But we're still going to have to pay attention to those post herbicide applications to get any corn that would germinate just a little bit later from that. So, volunteer corn is going to be a big issue, and we'll have some things to think about there. After I get done here, I will post, we have a webinar where Prashant Jha this afternoon, actually at 1 o'clock, he's going to be talking a little bit about some options and some additional things to think about. So he's our Iowa State weed scientist on that, and I'll put a link to that in the chat box when I get done.
Okay.
The other thing that Mike mentioned was fertility as we think about these unharvested acres. So as far as it goes, if the corn was dent stage or later, we were probably at roughly 90 to 95% of the nutrient uptake that was going to occur had already occurred, right? So
Right.
From the standpoint of what was used by the crop, it's pretty close to normal. If it was in the dough stage, it was a little bit less. I only mention that because where we do have some of this that does get harvested, if it wasn't quite in the dough stage when we had these events, the uptake might have been less. Now, if this is unharvested corn that we're talking about, the nitrogen, the phosphorus, and the potassium, all those nutrients that were taken up are going to be recycled back into the soil. The question is more along the lines of how soon will they be recycled back? Phosphorus is mostly in the vegetative material, potassium is mostly in the vegetative material. Is going to leach out of those really quite quickly. The nitrogen in the vegetative material will also leach out of that material pretty quickly back into the soil, but it's the nitrogen, basically the grain protein, that will take a little bit longer to recycle back in. In some respects, you can think of it as a slow release fertilizer option there. We do generally think, as long as it's decomposing, we do generally think that it will be available for the next year's crop. Now, obviously, where I'm recommending that be soybeans next year, we aren't really worried about the nitrogen side of it. Soybeans can fix their own nitrogen, so we don't need to worry about applying nitrogen differently. Just generally thinking about the phosphorus and potassium, if we're going to soybeans and we've been applying based on a 2-year crop rotation, we probably, again, on unharvested acres, we probably don't need to change anything. If anything, we could probably reduce our P&K applications just because this unharvested unharvested corn, the phosphorus and potassium will get back into the soil and will be usable by that soybean crop.
Good.
Okay, great. Thanks.
Ben Newley, it looks like you have a question. Go ahead.
Yes, can you hear me?
Hear you, Ben.
Hey, thanks for hosting the call, Secretary Nag. I just want you to kind of elaborate on what you hope Secretary of Agriculture Perdue takes away from his visit tomorrow, as well as what message you have as far as needing federal assistance from USDA.
Yeah, well, first of all, look, USDA is a great partner. Again, whether we're talking about the Risk Management Agency and lots of conversations that we're having there, the Farm Service Agency, NRCS, all such important partners and important in that farmer-facing, effort to provide whatever assistance we can and whatever advice we can. And so it's a very, very important partnership. As we think about it, though, we talked a lot about this. This is an event that it's not that we're not used to dealing with adverse weather conditions. It happens every year in agriculture. We're used to that. What's different is the size and the scale and the severity of what happened here in the state of Iowa the beginning of August. And that's why this is different. And so I think it's important to get your eyes on that. And so we really appreciate the fact that Secretary Perdue is coming to the state. We're going to be able to provide him an opportunity to cover a lot of ground and see both crop damage and damage to our commercial and on-farm grain storage facilities that has really had a tremendous impact on us. And I think that'll just be important for him to see it, to see the scale of it. And then, of course, we are going to be talking about conservation as well, just as we have this morning. And the final piece would be to just once again be able to visit with the Secretary about those underlying ag economy issues and the issues that we're having, the challenges around profitability, both COVID related, but also things that existed before COVID. And so that's where we need to be thinking about really hitting the gas on exports and really moving in that direction. And in Iowa, we need to strengthen renewable fuels. And so those underlying ag economy issues will also be on the agenda, something we'll certainly talk about. But top of mind tomorrow, we hope, is getting the Secretary a chance to see the scale and the severity of what Iowa farmers and our communities are dealing with.
Any additional questions for the group?
Well, Keely, if I might, in closing, Mark and Mike, thank you. I want to make sure folks are aware of the resources. Iowa State Extension, really a lot of resources available there that Mark referenced. Farmers.gov that Mike referenced. IowaAgriculture.gov from a state perspective. And then once again, let's all be thinking about and remembering that there's a tremendous amount of stress, and this is a very, very challenging time in the ag community. And so I want to once again make sure that we're highlighting the Iowa Concerns Hotline, 800-447-1985. Again, that's provided through the Iowa State Extension, a very important resource to make sure that folks are available, to folks. Pick up the phone if you need to talk to somebody. We need to help each other get through this very challenging time. And of course, safety. As we think about heading into fall, something that we all need to be thinking about. We got a lot on our minds. There's a lot of uncertainty, a lot of challenges, a lot of stress, and we really need to be keeping safety first and front and center. We don't want to compound an already challenging situation with an injury. So thanks everybody for joining us this morning, and please feel free to follow up if you have additional questions or need additional resources after today. Keely?
Thank you all so much. We appreciate you for being here. As always, if you have questions for Secretary Nag, please feel free to reach out to me. If you have questions for Mark Licht, please reach out to Malia Licht at Iowa State University. And I guess also if you have questions for USDA, you can reach out to Jason Johnson there. Thank you all for your time. A recording will be available online later today.